On July 13, 1985, the world witnessed one of the most iconic concerts in history as more than 20 legendary acts performed for an audience of 2 billion people across over 100 countries. The massive charity event, featuring stars like Status Quo, Spandau Ballet, Phil Collins, and Sting, raised more than £40 million, the equivalent of around £100 million today, to help combat famine in Ethiopia. Phil Collins famously made history by performing on both sides of the Atlantic in a single day, while Freddie Mercury's flawless performance with Queen was so unforgettable that it's often mistakenly remembered as his last with the band. This Sunday marks 40 years since that historic day, a milestone that not only celebrates the concert's place in rock and roll legend but also casts a bittersweet light on the hardships and heartbreaks that later touched the lives of many artists who made Live Aid such an unforgettable moment. Let's take a look at how the lives of the stars who took to the stage at Wembley have been blighted by tragedy in the last 40 years. 1. Organizer Sir Bob Geldof, devastating loss of wife and daughter. Sir Bob Geldof first rose to fame in the 1970s as the frontman of the Boomtown Rats but is just as well known today for his tireless humanitarian work. As the co-founder of Band Aid and the legendary Live Aid concert, he played a huge role in using music to change lives, yet behind the scenes, he has faced unimaginable personal loss. Geldof's hardships began early. When he was only 6 years old, his mother, Evelyn, died of a cerebral hemorrhage at the age of 41. In 1976, Bob began a relationship with Paula Yates, the TV presenter who would become famous in the 1980s for hosting The Tube. Together they had a daughter, Fifi Trixabel, and married in 1986, later welcoming 2 more daughters, Peaches and Pixie. However, their marriage suffered when Paula had an affair. In the 2023 Channel 4 documentary Paula, singer Terence Trent D'Arby recalled how Geldof once confronted him in a New York hotel, demanding to know if he was sleeping with his wife. In 1995, Paula left Geldof for INXS frontman Michael Hutchence, whom she interviewed the year before on The Big Breakfast. They had a daughter, Tiger Lily, in 1996. Just a year later, Michael was found dead in a Sydney hotel room. The coroner ruled it suicide while under the influence of drugs and alcohol, though Paula maintained that his death may have been a tragic accident during a sex act gone wrong, something the couple had experimented with before. Tragedy struck again in 2000 when Paula herself died at home in Notting Hill from an accidental heroin overdose. It was her 4-year-old daughter Tiger Lily who told a friend calling the house that she couldn't wake her mother. After losing both parents, Tiger Lily was formally adopted by Geldof, joining her half-sisters under his care. But heartbreak continued to haunt the family. In 2014, Bob's second daughter, Peaches, died from a heroin overdose. Her intake was found to be 10 times higher than the dose that killed her mother. Peaches left behind 2 young sons, Ostela and Phaedra, and her husband Thomas Cohen. Phaedra, just a toddler at the time, was alone for hours before Peaches' death was discovered. Though Peaches had reportedly been sober for 5 months, she relapsed and had hidden heroin in the attic of their Kent home. Her husband told the inquest she was secretly using again. While police concluded there was no sign she intended to take her own life, she was said to be in good spirits and making plans for the future. Speaking months after her passing, Sir Bob described the pain of losing Peaches as unbearable and said he wanted his grandchildren shielded from the public drama surrounding the family's tragedies. He later confessed that part of him had always feared Peaches might die young and that her memory stays with him constantly. 2. Phil Collins, devastating spinal cord injury and 3 marriage breakdowns. In a heartbreaking twist of fate, Phil Collins, renowned for creating some of the most iconic drum solos in rock history, can no longer play the instrument that defined his career due to a devastating spinal injury. Back in 2009, the former Genesis frontman disclosed that after decades behind a drum kit, he had lost the ability to even grip his drumsticks properly. The injury stemmed from years of drumming, which caused dislocated vertebrae in his upper neck during the 2007 Genesis reunion tour. Although he underwent surgery to repair the damage, it left him with nerve damage and numbness in his fingers, forcing him to tape the sticks to his hands just to keep performing. Reflecting on his condition, the now 73-year-old said, "After 5 decades of drumming, I've had to stop. The way I sit when I drum has slowly crushed my spinal cord, and I can't hold the sticks anymore without pain. Sometimes I even taped them to my hands just to get through a show." Phil's health battles didn't stop there. In 2010, he opened up about sinking into depression and even contemplating suicide, but ultimately stopped himself when he thought of his children. Then in 2017, he underwent back surgery following a fall in his bathroom, which further limited his mobility. That same year, he shared that he had developed type 2 diabetes and needed hyperbaric chamber treatment to heal an infected diabetic abscess on his foot. Alongside his physical struggles, Phil's personal life has also seen its share of pain. He has endured 3 failed marriages, with his most recent divorce from Oriane Sevi making headlines for its bitterness. Oriane once claimed she felt trapped in a golden cage while Phil battled an alcohol-fueled depression during their marriage, which ended in 2008. Surprisingly, the couple rekindled their relationship briefly in 2016, with Oriane telling the Mail on Sunday they had fallen profoundly and deeply in love once again. 3. Paul Young. When Paul Young agreed to perform at Live Aid, he was at the height of his solo career, having just left his former band, the Q-Tips. It was in 1983, while shooting the music video for his hit Come Back and Stay, that Paul met Stacy Smith, the woman who would become his wife. Their relationship was famously stormy, and they even split for a while when Stacy began dating stuntman Eddie Kidd. But in 1987, Paul and Stacy tied the knot and welcomed their first child, Levi, that same year. They went on to have 2 more children, Layla in 1994 and Grady in 1996. Nearly 20 years into their marriage, the couple hit another rough patch when Stacy confessed to an affair with Israeli businessman Elon Slazenger. Around the same time, Paul's music career was floundering, and he lost much of his wealth in a failed property investment. In an unexpected twist, he even ended up working as a chef in the restaurant owned by Stacy and her new partner, drawing on his appearances in Celebrity MasterChef and Hell's Kitchen. During their separation, Stacy became pregnant with Elon's child. Despite this, Paul chose to forgive her, and the pair reunited, with Paul adopting her son, Jude. Reflecting on that painful time, he said, "The split wasn't easy, but he refused to hold any grudges," adding, "Stacy was my mate when we married, so why shouldn't she still be my mate?" Speaking later on Loose Women, Paul described them as an ordinary blended family and said Jude's biological father remained partly involved in his life. In 2016, Paul and Stacy marked 30 years of marriage alongside Paul's 60th birthday, but sadly, that same year, Stacy was diagnosed with brain cancer. She died 2 years later at their family home, surrounded by loved ones. Paul announced her passing on X, saying she died peacefully with her 4 children, Levi, Layla, Grady, and Jude, by her side. Opening up about her final years during an appearance on This Morning in 2018, Paul said the family focused on cherishing the time they had left and staying close. He explained that Stacy was proud to see his career recovering and that working again helped them heal together. Last year, Paul remarried, tying the knot with fiancée Lorna Young, but his children chose not to attend the ceremony. A family friend told Mail Online that it was simply too painful for them so soon after losing their mother. "They're still deeply grieving, and being at such a big occasion with everyone watching would have been overwhelming," the friend said, adding that Paul and Lorna fully understood and respected their decision. 4. George Michael never got over loss of first love before his untimely death. Throughout his 4 decades in the public eye, George Michael grappled deeply with his sexuality, often admitting he felt like a fraud for keeping it hidden for so long. But if he hadn't lost his first true love to the AIDS crisis, his life might have unfolded in a profoundly different way. In Freedom, the documentary George was working on just 2 days before his sudden death, the late singer reflected on the devastating loss of Anselmo Felipe, the man who changed everything for him. George was just 27 when he spotted Anselmo, a Brazilian designer, in the crowd at Rock in Rio. At the time, he was at the peak of his fame, having gone solo and topping global charts with Faith. In an intimate interview recorded 3 months before he passed away on Christmas Day 2016, George remembered how one look from Anselmo in the front row among 160,000 people completely captivated him. "There was this guy to the right of the stage just staring at me. I was so distracted I had to avoid that side because I thought I'd forget my lyrics," George shared. "The moment I saw him, I felt he'd become part of my life. And everything changed. I was happier than ever before." He described Anselmo as his first true, selfless love, someone who helped him embrace who he really was. It's hard to feel proud of your sexuality when it brings you no happiness. But when it's tied to love and joy, you can finally be proud. Anselmo made that possible, George said, calling those 6 months together the happiest time of his life. But alongside the joy came fear. When Anselmo caught a lingering flu while staying at George's home in Los Angeles, doctors suggested an HIV test, news that terrified George. It was the most frightening time. I was so scared of losing him. He saved me. Meeting him changed everything, George recalled. Not long after, George's mother was diagnosed with cancer, and the two losses, Anselmo's illness and his mother's decline, left him feeling targeted by fate. I took it so badly. I've never known depression like it. From the day I found out about Anselmo to the day I recovered after my mother's passing, it was constant fear of losing people I loved, he said. On Christmas Day 1991, George sat with his family in the UK, anxiously waiting for Anselmo, who was in LA, to confirm his test results. Anselmo eventually flew to London after New Year's to share the devastating truth: he was HIV positive. Home videos and Freedom show rare glimpses of their relationship. George described the moment he learned Anselmo's illness was terminal as utterly devastating. In March 1993, Anselmo died at just 33 after returning to Brazil for a blood transfusion and suffering a brain hemorrhage. George received the news over the phone from a friend in LA, then it all went blurry, he said. Even 23 years later, he could still make me cry. He was my savior. 5 years after losing Anselmo, George publicly came out as gay during a CNN interview and spent years raising awareness for HIV/AIDS causes. In his final years, George continued to battle depression and addiction. He died of heart disease in 2016, found in bed by his partner Fadi Fawaz on Christmas morning at his Oxfordshire home, a tragically fitting echo of the holiday that had once brought him so much fear and heartbreak. 5. Mid-year, alcoholism struggles. In 1984, Ultravox frontman Midge joined forces with Sir Bob Geldof to launch Band-Aid, co-writing the iconic charity single Do They Know It's Christmas? With the Boomtown Rats singer. The song went on to become the second best-selling single in UK chart history and was re-recorded with new artists for charity again in 2004 and 2014. Despite the huge success of Band-Aid and his role in helping organize the historic Live Aid concert the following year, the Scottish musician has spoken candidly about his struggles with alcohol. Midge has shared how his drinking worsened and led to addiction after losing his father in 2001. In a 2014 interview with BBC Radio Manchester, he reflected on how close anyone can come to falling apart when faced with overwhelming grief or stress. It's a very fine line between coping and tipping over the edge, and I fell over that line for a while, he said. I was shocked at how easily it can happen to anyone. We're all under massive pressures: money, relationships, life, and it can make us all fragile. Beyond Band-Aid, Midge enjoyed major hits in the 1980s both with Ultravox and alongside Steve Strange in the synth-pop band Visage. A father of 4, 1 daughter with his first wife, Annabelle Giles, and 3 with his second wife, Sheridan Forbes, Midge has spoken openly about how his family keeps him from relapsing. The cruel truth about addiction is you tell yourself you're only hurting yourself, but that's never true, he once said. Am I tempted to drink again? Of course, that urge is always there, like a monkey on your shoulder. But what stops me is knowing the pain it would bring to my family. 6. Sting lost both parents in a year. Just 4 years after the historic Live Aid concert, Sting endured a profound personal tragedy when both of his parents, Audrey and Ernest, died of cancer only months apart. Choosing to avoid any public attention, the Police frontman decided not to attend either funeral near his childhood home in Tyne and Wear, on the edge of Northumberland. Over the years, Sting has alluded to the complicated and often strained bond he shared with his parents, especially his father. In a 2007 book of his song lyrics, he admitted, "His death hit me harder than I'd ever thought possible, despite their difficult relationship." In his memoir Broken Music, Sting described how his mother married his father, once a handsome young soldier fresh from military service, when she was still a teenager. He recounted the day he discovered his mother's affair with one of his father's employees. One morning, leaving early for school, he caught them together. I didn't see anything, but I ran. I heard the door slam behind me. She didn't find me in my room afterwards. I wondered if it was my fault and had no one to tell me it wasn't. In a 2003 interview with the Irish Times, Sting reflected on how he'd underestimated the importance of properly mourning his parents. I thought I'd said my goodbyes, and that was enough. But I didn't realize how much I needed to share that part, burying them, being there with family. I skipped it and threw myself back into work. Deep down, I was terrified. Running away is what I've always done. A year later, in a conversation with the Sunday Independent, Sting spoke about how his difficult upbringing shaped him. I went from being a deeply unhappy child, always feeling out of place, to where I am now. I'm happier than I've ever been. Not smug, but content. Back then, I was driven to succeed, to get noticed, to be the best, to win. Now, I don't need that the same way anymore. 7. Rick Parfett died of sepsis after being treated awfully by Status Quo. At the peak of Status Quo's success, Rick Parfett lived life at full throttle, starting his mornings with whiskey and red wine, chain-smoking 30 cigarettes a day, and flaunting a collection of 10 Porsches, despite having a drink-driving conviction on his record. His wild antics were legendary. During one of Status Quo's 106 performances on Top of the Pops, Rick was so drunk he toppled off the stage, dragging the band's drummer down with him. Reflecting on those hedonistic days, the guitarist admitted, "In the 70s and 80s I was a bit of a monster. I really embraced the sex, drugs, and rock and roll lifestyle. I'd vanish on benders for days at a time." Rick described the cycle of excess like something out of a film. You'd wake up feeling like the beast had gone, you were normal for a bit, until you drank the potion again. At the height of his partying, he estimated he blew through £1.7 million on hard drugs alone. Sadly, Rick Parfett passed away on Christmas Eve in 2016 at a hospital in Marbella after developing sepsis. After his death, his son, Rick Parfett Jr., claimed his father had been treated poorly by his bandmates in his final months. When the band performed a comeback show in Estonia just 4 months later, Parfett Jr. took to social media to share his feelings, tweeting that the lack of tribute speaks volumes. He added, "Dad was treated awfully. You don't know what I know." However, Status Quo's manager, Simon Porter, rejected the claim, telling Mail Online at the time that both he and the band were shocked and saddened by the accusations. He insisted they had always supported Rick after he stepped down from touring before his death and found the comments unfair and disappointing. 8. Allison Moyet, battle with agoraphobia. Allison Moyet shot to fame at just 21 as one half of the 1980s electropop duo Yazoo before launching a hugely successful solo career that saw her sell over 25 million records worldwide. But with fame came deep personal struggles. Moyet has spoken openly about how she grew up feeling unattractive and alone, often tormented by cruel remarks about her appearance and her ongoing battle with her weight. "By my teenage years, I was so convinced I looked like the Elephant Man that I deliberately tried to make myself as unappealing as possible. It was my way of fighting back," she once shared. In an industry dominated by what she described as beautiful people, Allison felt like an outsider. At the height of her success in the 1980s, she developed agoraphobia, a severe anxiety disorder that left her terrified of public spaces. For nearly 10 years, she became virtually housebound, struggling with depression and rarely venturing outside. She even admitted to hiding in cupboards for hours to avoid being seen. The anxiety returned in the late 1990s when she clashed with her record label and became stuck in a 6-year legal fight to end her contract. Reflecting on that time, she told The Guardian, "I'd just sit at home getting bigger and bigger, watching TV, telling myself I couldn't possibly appear on it. I was drifting further away from the world I was meant to work in." In 2014, Allison revealed how painful those years had been, admitting she once wiped her entire computer to erase any reminder of her fame. On Desert Island Discs, she also confessed to destroying her gold records with a hammer, a symbolic break from her past. Today, Moyet is back performing and touring, and she's returned to X, formerly Twitter, after leaving the platform in 2018 following accusations of transphobia. She had signed an open letter urging Stonewall to recognize that there is a clash between transgender ideology and sex-based rights for women, a stance that sparked controversy but highlighted her commitment to speaking up for what she believes in. 9. Martin Kemp, 10 Years to Live. During Live Aid, Martin Kemp was at the height of fame as 1/6 of Spandau Ballet, one of the UK's biggest bands at the time. The group stayed together until 1990 when they split amid a highly publicized dispute over songwriting royalties. Just 5 years after the breakup, Martin's world was turned upside down when he was diagnosed with 2 brain tumors, forcing him to undergo radiotherapy and surgery. Speaking to the Daily Mail in 2009, Martin recalled, "The first tumor was like a squashed grapefruit, and doctors were able to open my skull to remove it. But the second one was terrifying. They avoided talking about it, which made me even more worried." Doctors feared the second tumor was growing, but Martin's wife Shirley, with whom he shares 2 children, Roman and Harley, was deeply concerned about the risks of another invasive operation. Martin explained, "Shirley found a specialist who suggested using radiation instead, an early form of gamma knife treatment. Within 6 months, there were signs it was shrinking, and today there's nothing left of it." Despite the successful treatment, Martin admitted to his son Roman that he had once accepted he might not survive. In an emotional episode of Roman's podcast FFS, "My dad is Martin Kemp," Roman asked his father how many more years he thinks he has left. Martin answered honestly, "If I'm really honest, I'd say about 10 more years." Reflecting on the experience, Martin shared, "Since I was 34 and went through the brain tumor ordeal, I spent 2 years believing I was going to die. So every day, every year since then has felt like a gift. Back then, I'd already made peace with the idea of dying. I looked back and thought, what a life. So now, every single month I'm still here as a bonus." He added with a smile that he'd be content if he reached 80, "That gives me another 18 years, I'd be happy with that." Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe and turn on the notification bell for more updates on celebrity deaths and news updates.